And we are live. Welcome, Ryan. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. It is always an honor to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Bright and early. Get to talk to one of my good buddies. Share some stuff that hopefully could be of help to other people.
Yeah, I think I love this idea of just putting ourselves in a situation, putting ourselves into an experience where we're not exactly sure where it's going to go or where we're going to lead. We have the expectation or the intention, anyways, that we're going to have some sort of insight or revelation or something of value that we can take throughout the day. And I think I don't know if I've told this story on here before. I remember years ago sitting with a gentleman. At the time, he was in his late 70s, I believe. We called him Pastor John. And he was an old biker guy, and he had these, like, his arm was full of tattoos, and his tattoos had been there so long that they're really like smudgy. They look like smudge tattoos. So, and he talked to us about this idea of the best day of our life, and he said one day you're going to get to the end of your life. You're going to have the last day. You're going to be on your deathbed. You're going to be taking your last breaths. And in that moment, you're going to look back on your life and you're going to remember the best day of your life. You're going to look back and like, oh, that was the best day. He said, that day might be today. He said, you have no idea because you're not there yet. So it might be today. So why don't you spend your time today looking for reasons why today could be the best day? It might not be. Maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it already happened, but you don't know. And I love that idea of just looking for, like, walking around with the expectation that something cool is going to happen. Like you're in a movie or you're in a video game where around the corner, something really cool could happen. And to be in an awareness of that for life, as opposed to dreading the day or just going into default mode, that we have the opportunity. And I love this medium and this platform to be able to so we put ourselves into an opportunity. I give myself an opportunity to first thing in the morning, this morning, that I get to learn or I get to grow and I get to share and I get to contribute part of myself and grow myself because I chose to and because you chose to.
Wow. I love that. I love, well, yeah, everything you just said there. It's 6:03. We're 3 minutes into this conversation, and I've already learned something. I've already had a huge insight from Biker John in terms of how to look at a day. I love that because you're right. It can be, and I do this too, right? You can get into a mode. You could get into a funk. You could get into a mindset of just choosing to look at things that kind of bug you, or look at the reasons why things aren't going to be the best day. Like you can, we're seek and find sort of beings, right? If we want to and we put our mind on something, we'll find it. And so what do we choose? What do we want to put our mind on? And thanks to Biker John, we could put our mind on how could today be, maybe today's going to be the best possible day. Let's look for reasons why. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, like Tony Robbins would always do I've seen him do hundreds of times in his interventions. He'd ask someone, like, tell me something you're grateful for. And somebody would be like, I'm not grateful for anything. And like, okay, well, if you're not grateful for anything, what could you be grateful for? If you were, I'm not saying that you are, but if you were, what could you be grateful for? And even just the act of searching for things that you could be grateful for actually starts to create gratitude. It actually starts to create that experience for you.
Yeah, and from that place, when you're in that mode, that I think helps you get closer to, being Biker John, where if you can find those things you're grateful for, you can find more things to appreciate in your life, and then potentially that can lead to being in a different mindset of like, oh yeah, today is already awesome. Look at all the things that I already have to be grateful for. Like, just the fact that I'm having this conversation with you and I'm awake and we're talking about these amazing things and you're stirring, thoughts in my mind and we're on this technology. I mean, that's already a phenomenal day.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Dr. Peter Attia. He was talking to Andrew Huberman on one of their podcasts, and Peter was talking about a mechanism or a practice that he had recently learned about how to create more gratitude and bring himself back like out of stress and anxiety. Is that when he was in a moment with his kids, that he would picture himself. So let's say if he was in a really stressful moment with his kids are acting out, or one of them's having a meltdown or something, whatever's happening, he would imagine himself as an 80-year-old, like taken out of that situation. So he's like out of body, and he's looking at this situation from the outside, as if he's 80 years old, looking back to this moment. And I think of so often the kids' like smudge marks on the windows, and the half-eaten food all over the floor, and the stuff that really annoys us in the moment potentially. But if we were just to look back, like all of a sudden, I mean, at some point that's going to stop for us, and you're in a different, bit of a different situation or different season, I guess, with your kids. They're a little bit older than mine. One of them is about the same age as my oldest. But I remember little things that would annoy the crap out of me when they were younger. But now that it's not happening anymore, it's like, oh, I miss it. And I think back, like if I could just remove myself, like Peter was saying, like you just remove yourself and look back on that moment as if you're looking at it from the outside. It's like, oh, like it doesn't have the same weight. It's like, oh no, like I appreciate that. I appreciate the smudge marks I appreciate the kids not wanting to go to bed. I appreciate all that, because it's something that, we'll never get back at some point.
Yeah, right. That's such a good point. I mean, just to be able to get perspective, right? And to be able to do that with yourself, to be able to pause in a moment like that where you might notice, like, okay, is there a different way I can look at this? And then just to have that, your own ability, like they're talking about, to have a different perspective, to put yourself again in your 80-year-old self shoes and looking at this. Or, I've done this exercise with my coach where you will put yourself in the other person's shoes and have a look at yourself in that moment, and then be like, ooh, that's not how I want to be right now. Or put yourself, as a third person looking at the whole scenario, or putting yourself in a bit more of a macro view of things, looking down and so just to be able to have a different perspective sometimes can be super helpful to get you out maybe of a mode that you're not, the big thing is, I think it's just being able to notice, like, that pause, to be like, maybe there's a different way to look at this. I think that's huge. Just that initial awareness, because I think you mentioned it before. We can go into autopilot where we're just letting the day kind of run us, and we're looking at things and we're getting frustrated by things. And just that ability, though, I think that's part of the, self-awareness path, is just to be able to go, okay, I'm not showing up the way I'd like here. How can I see this differently, right? And as an 80-year-old self, or what's here that I could look at that could be part of maybe my best day. Like that pause and ability to pull yourself out of a mode is huge, right? Yeah, and
that I think very much aligns with something that we both teach our kids, and something that's becoming more popular, which I'm really excited about, is this idea of growth mindset. Like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset would be somebody who just doesn't see any other way. They're just stuck in their way of thinking. They believe that their story that they're telling themselves, about their world, about their relationships, about their kids, about their parents, about their everything, is that there's only one way to look at it. They're very myopic in that sense. And a growth mindset looks at it differently, in that we see that there are different perspectives. We see that there are different possibilities, and that if we have failed at something, that it's not that we have failed because we are a failure, is that we haven't done it yet. There's all these little things that we tell ourselves, and that the little tweaks in how we think, that really allow us to be able to expand, as opposed to just stay stuck. Because so many people, they see their stories as truth, as this is it. There's only one way. And once we start to poke little holes into that, like, oh, well, actually, like Byron Katie's work in her book, The Work, when she asked the question, we ask the question, any situation, any story that we believe we're telling ourselves, anything that we are programming into our own minds and conditioning within ourselves is this true? And I know when I'm stuck in a moment, the answer is always, well, yeah, this is true. And then the follow-up question is, well, is it really true? Like, do you have all of the data? Could there potentially be a reason why this is not true? And always, if I'm being honest with myself, I always get to, well, no, it's potentially not true. There could be a different way to look at it. So then, if there's potentially another way of looking at it, then it's not true. So we see that, oh, these are all stories. So either we're telling ourselves a story that is serving us, that we then go, yeah, I'm going to hold on to this story and I'm going to ride this out because this is serving me right now, or it's not serving me. So what is another, like we were saying, so you just take a different perspective. What if I was this other person? So I do this exercise called walking the block. So you look at it from like, so this is my story. Okay, this is not necessarily true. It's not getting me what I want, so I want to maybe change it. So what's the other one? So it's like, what's the opposite view, or what's the opposite story that I could be telling myself? Let's say if I was talking about somebody else, I would say, like, well, what's their story? Like, what would their perspective be? Or if it was about myself, like, what would an outside person be looking at? Like, if I was talking to myself in the third person, what would that look like? And then the last one be the desire. Like, what's my desired story? What do I actually want? And I think that's something that so many people miss, is we don't ask ourselves, well, what do I really want? And you really helped me to discover a lot more, or bring that to more of light. You recommended the book Essentialism to me. That I'd love to get into that with you a little bit. I haven't actually started reading the book yet, but I started listening to the podcast with Tim Ferriss and Greg McGowan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this McEwen. It's been fascinating so far, just listening to the podcast episode, but just really dialing in, like, what is it that I really want? And all these things that I'm doing, these things that I'm holding on to, these things that maybe I've just dragged in from my childhood, like, is it actually what I want? And just starting to examine that, it's like, okay, well, if this is what I want, but this is the story I'm telling myself, maybe it's not going to end well. And I do that with my kids a lot too, as much as I can. When they have some sort of big emotion or something, they're going through something, they're like, well, okay, well, what do you want? What do you want from right now? Well, they want this. Well, so if you keep telling yourself what you're telling yourself, are you going to get that? No. So what else could you tell yourself? What else could be going on here? And I find kids are so great with that, because they love to play with things. They love to use their imagination. They love to step into other worlds, just by the fact of just giving them the opportunity to do so. For us, we got to like be dragged in kicking and screaming sometimes. But for kids, just given the opportunity, like, oh, okay, yeah, let's try something else on. Let's put a costume on.
Yeah, I think naturally they are super curious, right? They do want to experiment. Like, I know, when I used to make games, on the phone, I would give it to them to test, because they would press every possible button on the screen. And you're like, what are you doing? Wait, and people would oh, okay, wait, that breaks, they're just, they're funny, because they will naturally want to just test things, right? Like I have these, the Facebook Meta, Ray-Ban, whatever glasses, these sunglasses. And
yeah,
I've been experimenting with them, but I give them to my 7-year-old, and all of a sudden she's just asking it all these, like, she's overloading it with questions and just pushing it to the boundaries of things that I wouldn't do, because I already have my own sort of filters and biases and set ways of doing things. But like, they're just, I think if you let them, they're going to be wildly curious to try new things. And I think that's a great perspective as well with just themselves. If they really know what they want, I think that's super important. I'd love to talk about that work, the essentialism work. In my experience, if they know something that they really want, then, and you have that curiosity, you have that imagination, you have that growth mindset, then man, we are super creative, like as humans. Like we will find a way if we, again, are allowing ourselves and supporting others to be in that mindset. I mean, they'll figure it out. It's, it's incredible. I mean, just think about how manipulative. I mean, and that word kind of has a negative connotation, but like, think of how creative kids are, even at the youngest of ages, to play their parents, to teachers or whoever it is, to get what they want. Like, they're super resourceful, even at a super young age, right? If it's like candy or whatever, right? If it's something they think that they really want, they'll find a way.
Yeah, they find a way.
I mean, so it's a matter of like channeling that superpower that we have, even from the young. Like I can't remember the story right now, but it's like 4 years old that they will figure out a way, right, to create a story or create a situation or to manipulate their parents to get what they want. Like, again, I think it's being able to tap into that and not lose that, not condition that out of kids, like supporting that, because I think there's inherently a growth mindset very early on in kids when they want to learn. They're super curious about the world, but I think that we can, and there's lots of books on this. We can sort of condition it out of ourselves and our kids to start looking narrowly at the world, to start imposing on them, no, this is the way things are, this is what happened, teaching them more what to think and not how to think, I think is a slippery slope. But I think, at least in my experience, kids, if I look at them in kindergarten, they're just super curious about the world, and to be able to help continue that on so that they remain curious to, whatever age, right? Because as we're talking here, there's all kinds of stuff to learn that we don't know. Like in the first 3 minutes, I learned something that might change my whole life. Like, just imagine every possible experience that you have. There's something huge that you could learn, or huge that you can be grateful for, or something that might turn out to be, again, like we started out with, like the best day you've ever had. Like, you could be experiencing right now with a different mindset. I think that's tremendous.
Yeah, I think about looking back at that moment with Pastor John about that this could be the best day of your life. He told us that, and I don't know that he had prepared in his mind and prepared in his soul that, like, today is the day I'm going to impart this wisdom on these people, and that's going to go viral. And in 20 years from now, they're going to be talking about it on a podcast. It's like that probably wasn't in the equation. He was just sharing himself in the moment, and the ripple effect of that is amazing. Like, I think about that moment at least a few times a week. And that was a really pivotal moment for me. It was a really transformative moment, something that I've taken since then. And we don't necessarily know what those moments are going to be. I don't know that if something I say today will affect millions of people later. I don't know. Right. But I do know that if I go through my day with intention, if I go through my day with that idea of, okay, today might be the best day. Today might be the day where I help to transform somebody. I'm a catalyst for somebody to transform their own lives. Today I'm of service in a way that someone will remember. There's a responsibility there. I feel like there's for lack of a better term, there's a gravitas to that. That's heavier, and that feels more important than just, I'm just gonna do whatever.
Flapping in the wind through the day, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about this. So you read this book, Essentialism. I'd love to get into that with you, because it's, like I said, I have not read the book yet. I've read just from the summary of it. I could sort of get the idea, and I'm really looking forward to digging into it. And I loved listening to the author talk about it. But I'd love to get your perspective on how it's helped shape where you are now, how you're bringing it into your parenting. Because I think as being a dad, I know for you and I know for me, it is such a pivotal, such a central part of who we believe ourselves to be and how we want to show up in the world, and the thing that we really want. I love being a dad. It's it's one of those things that when I'm in the darkest of dark, and I think about, I'm going through like my priming exercises and thinking about something that I'm grateful for, I easily can get to and always go back to my kids. It's something that is just so, like, I'd never question my love for them and my desire to want to serve them and be there for them and like that. So
yeah, we're on the same page there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so tell me about that journey for you. Would you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, happy to, because it's one of my favorite books. For me, my favorite books are the ones that I can read, and like it creates profound distinction in my life. And there's a handful of these books where I don't just read them and then I was like, oh, that's great, and I don't really think about them again, right? They're good, there's some books that I've enjoyed, but they don't stick with me. There's books like this one though, Essentialism, where it continues to be a practice. Like the Four Agreements. That's a classic one that I read, I don't know, 10 years ago, where every day it's a practice I've made it a practice to live those Four Agreements. I feel like they're so helpful and so impactful that I think if anyone were to just read that one book and implement that in your life, it would make just an incredible difference compounded over time. So there's books like that one where it wasn't even that thick. It wasn't that big a book. The Big Leap is another one. There's books like these that they're not actually that long, but the amount of, in my opinion, wisdom in them and how effective or how much impact they can create and have created in my life by actually taking some of what's in that book and putting it into my life and on a day-to-day practice. These are the books that make up some of my favorites. And so Essentialism I put right up there on my list, because as soon as I started listening to the podcasts, interviewing with Greg, and as soon as I started reading the book, I was like immediately able to apply it into my life. And the more I did, just the more profound the impact was. And then so you get this like compounding effect, right? And you stick with the work. I just think is incredible when you find books like this. So yeah, I'm super happy to chat about it. I was curious. Yeah, do you have a few books like this as well? Like how would you determine a really good book? And are there some like these that I'm talking about that have created profound impact in your life?
Yeah, one of them for sure would be the Big Leap, the Four Agreements. And you're absolutely right. It's the books where I find myself using their language in my day-to-day life, things that I think back to. So when I think about the Big Leap, I always think about upper limiting. So those things, so I use those, and when I use those terms with other people, when they understand, or when they use it with me, I'm like, oh, okay, I know that they've read that book. My favorite book that is not. Well, so my favorite book is called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's actually a story by this guy Richard Bach. It's a fiction book about a seagull who wants to break away from the pack and not just live just to eat and to survive, but to fly. He loves to fly. But it's a book that I was given when I was 11, and I think it holds more meaning because of my parents gave it to me when I was 11, and I've read it every year since. But my favorite nonfiction book would be, as another one would be right up there, would be The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he's a writer. He wrote, if you remember, there's the movie called The Legend of Bagger Vance with Will Smith and the other guy from Good Will Hunting.
Okay,
whatever his name was.
Matt Damon.
Whatever his name was. Matt Damon, yeah. He wrote, so Stephen Pressfield wrote that book, and he wrote a bunch of books on fiction books on Greek mythology and things like that. But he wrote this book called The War of Art about the act of writing and the act of creation and his process of going through that. He talks about this creative act, or this creative spark. He calls it the muse, and he goes through what creates blocks for us, or why we don't why we have writer's blocks or creation blocks is he calls it, the word is resistance. We have this resistance, and so he talks about his process to go through it, how to get through resistance, and that book, when I read it, was like, I was like, oh my gosh, like so transformative, so pivotal, and so much of that, I think that's the book that I give the most often to people. I think it's another way I look at it too, is what are the books that I want to share the most? What are the books that I use their language the most? So probably the top three that would be up there would be just two that are similar to you: the Big Leap, the Four Agreements, and for me also the War of Art.
Okay, cool. I will put that on my list to read here. Maybe next. Um, yeah. I haven't read The War of Art, so that's awesome. I'd like to add that one. I will add that one. Yeah. Okay. So with essentialism, to give you some context, in last year, my business partner and I, we've been running a company for almost 9 years. We made video games played mostly by women on phones. So we published the games onto the Apple and Google stores. 2023 was a tough year. Some things might have changed, we think, in the algorithm, player behavior after COVID, and a bunch of things in the business started to struggle. So we put a lot of work into it. Like both of us just dove in, and we feel like we did everything we could to try and change the situation. And it still didn't change the sort of trajectory of things. And so I got to sort of nearing the end of 2023. It was starting to look like, wow, if we can't turn this ship around, if we can't sort of pull this thing up, what am I going to do next? Do I want to keep doing this? We could have, definitely together we could have figured out some other plans. We could have, made new games or pivoted onto some other things or stayed together. So it led me into a whole deep dive, and I'm sure you've done this before, and I've done this. I can remember the times over my life where, it's a bit of like soul searching, right? It's a little bit of like, what's really going on here? What's really important to me? What do I want? As you were saying before, like, what do I want to do in life? How do I really want to be? In terms of showing up. That's what for me these conversations are all about, is being dads. Like how do I really want to be in life? And so it's funny, the word essentialism just kept coming into my mind, and this is sort of going into Christmas, and I'm like, wait, why is this word showing up? And then, like we were saying before, sometimes once you start to seek things, you will find it. And so I was like, I feel like there's a book by this name. Wait, I've come across this book before, but I hadn't read it. So I was like, and I, Google it, and I'm like, oh yeah, there is. So, over Christmas, there was some really good time and space. Things were a little bit quieter. So I started to listen to the podcasts first. And I felt like the podcast with Greg and Tim, that one in particular, there's a new one that they just redid too, I think like in the last several months on this topic as well. The two of them got together. And I felt like the conversation around the book to start was really helpful because it did provide context, and they talked about like practically how do you go about implementing some of the work in this book. So that's why I like that podcast with Tim Ferriss, is because Tim put himself on the spotlight and is like, okay, I'm looking at writing a new book. How would I apply these principles to my own way of doing things in terms of how I would normally do things? And so they talked practically around, you can schedule like a retreat with yourself. And then Tim's like, well, how would you do that? Is that like a day? Do I go away? I mean, so it really kind of solidified some chunk down, some just like practical ways to actually implement this concept. So all that I found was super helpful. And then I did take some time. It was over, again, it was over the sort of the holiday period. My son had some training up in Whistler, ski training. So I would take him up there, drop him off, and then go for some walks in the woods. There's some amazing trails. And I would listen to the book, and I would make notes on my phone as I was listening to it. Some of the questions are really helpful. I mean, we could have a whole show on just questions, like how important, quality questions are to ask ourselves. And so that was one really big thing in the first part of the book, is some essential, some really important questions to ask ourselves about well, what is important to me? What do I really want? So I can recite some of those shortly. But I think that just context wise, it was a phase of life. This book showed up. I dove into it and I made it a practice, right? I made this book important to me. You know what I mean? Like I made it a study rather than just like a thing I'll blaze through it and then on to the next thing. No, I made it important because I think of just, the concept of the book and where I was in my life. And I think it was also similar when when sort of Greg came about this concept for himself. It was also at a similar time in his life. He tells the story in the book of he was sort of into law school, younger in his age, and definitely wasn't loving law school. And so he went through sort of a journaling exercise of all the things that he would love and did love and wanted to be doing with his life. And then looked at the journaling and realized that like being a lawyer in law school was nowhere on this journaling. And
Hmm.
so I think that sparked this work for him. But yeah, in a nutshell, it's figuring out what's really important to us. Like, kind of, I think it's strongly connected to our value system. Like, what do we value and what's really important to us? And creating the time and space to really uncover that for ourselves, like to really give ourselves an opportunity to figure that out. That's, I think, in a nutshell, for me, what the book's been about.
Very cool. And how have you found that it shifted things for you? Because it's one thing to say like, yeah, this is important, but then to actually put it into practice. Because there's so many times I can think of things that, and Greg mentions one of a story in the podcast that I was listening to, but like things that I will have attached from even from childhood, something that I will have been thinking about or have been doing. Let's say even like a career. Someone will go, yeah, but say they became a lawyer. Yeah, but I'm 20 years in. I've already spent all this time. I've already spent all this money. I've already spent all of this energy doing this thing. Like, how do I just not do it?
Right. Yeah, you could. So, I mean, if you look at it, so that's, like we were talking about at the beginning, we, there's different ways we could look at this. There's that where you could give a lot of, obviously, meaning and weight to sort of the investment of time and energy and all of that up to date. Um, I can't remember, if the book sort of provides context for that. But so I will say that I think the book just gives us an opportunity to just pause and reflect on our own life. And so, yes, you could look backwards on terms of everything that's happened and, all this, in terms of what we want to make all that mean up until now. And then I think really the book's about looking forward. And like, yeah, I'll give you the questions because uh, I'm trying to think about how it would look at the past and the future, but really it's about tuning into our present. And I think not looking at those things in the moment and considering what am I really excited about? Like, what am I passionate? I mean, Tony uses this word a lot, right? Passionate about, but like, what really gives me excitement? I think that's for me, I'm pretty sure that was the first question. And that's some of my wording around it. It's just like, if this thing that I've been doing for so long, I've put money in and, again, maybe I took it in school and there's all of and my parents said I should be doing this. Like there could be all this weight to all those factors. But at the end of the day, in terms of having the best days of our lives, going back to, did I call him Biker John? You said Pastor John, right?
I mean, he was a
I
biker
don't
too,
know.
so yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Biker.
Either way.
Okay, good. I was like, who are we talking about? But like, in order to have, in my opinion, these best days of our lives, it comes from emotion. Like to be able to create memorable moments, in order to create memorable days. If I think of the most memorable days up to this point in my life, they're all charged with big emotions. Those are the ones that stick out in my mind. Kids being born and, moments with my wife and moments with friends and others. Like all of them, the ones that stick out the most all have supercharged emotions around them. So in order to
Yeah.
have more of those great days, in my opinion, requires again a lot of juice, like a lot of really, well, memorable, but you could have quote unquote negative emotions, those are going to be memorable too. But if I want to have more of those great days, I'm going to want to create more positive emotions. In my opinion, to create more positive emotions, I'm going to want to be doing things that I love doing, that give me a lot of juice, that give me a lot of excitement, that I look forward to be doing every day. As you know, Greg had journaled, and as I had journaled coming into 2024, I wasn't getting a lot of excitement and juice from the thing that I had been doing for 9 years. It had kind of lost that. There definitely were some juicy times, and there was some excitement, but after doing it for quite a while, and just it wasn't aligned at this phase of my life. It wasn't aligned with my values, what I really found and find important for me.
Hmm.
So that to me is the first part, is to really figure out what is exciting. And it might not be what I've been doing in the past, right? Like we grow and we evolve, right? And as we do, things might change. And maybe it's always been there and I just haven't paid attention to it. I haven't been, willing to look at it. But to me, that's the very start of it, is like, what actually gives me a lot of juice? What am I really excited about? And allowing yourself to just let that come through, and that, maybe fighting that resistance, getting into that creative mode. So for me, it was going on these walks, listening to this book, some of these podcasts, allowing these ideas to be stirred up in me, and then writing them physically down. And that started to really get things clearer for me. Like if I go back and I can, I don't have very, well, I do. If I go back to my journal, which I've been doing thanks to this book as well, I've been journaling almost every day. I've missed a couple, but almost every single day I've been physically writing things that are important to me. And Greg has a really awesome perspective that got me excited about writing that down for the first time in a long time. But if I look back to what I wrote down at the end of December and the beginning of January in terms of what's essential, it's the same things I'm doing now. Like being a dad
Mm.
and finding more ways to, because I love doing it, finding more ways to not just do it with my own family, but share it with others and maybe making like a business out of it. That to me was one of the very few things that I wrote down that was essential. So that's a long answer to what you asked.
No, that's great. And I find that we discount, I often discount how powerful just asking the question is. So many times we will not even ask ourselves the questions because we either don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the space, we don't have the capacity, or we just have so much fear about what we'll actually see. Like, what if what I really want is this, but I'm doing this? What would that mean? Like, that could mean a complete upheaval of my life. And to look at that is scary. And I think, so bringing it back to the story with Pastor John, like, what if I was on my deathbed, looking back on this day, or looking back on my life? Would I want my life to just continue the way it was? Or what if I actually started to look at the things that I actually wanted? Like what if? I think that's such a powerful question. Just what if? And you talked about just the power of the quality of the questions that we ask ourselves. Tony talks about, so often he teaches that the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of the questions you ask yourself and others. And when we are stuck in this mode of just trying to get by, and we've definitely been there as dads, as parents, like, okay, we're just getting through today. If I could just get to bedtime, we'll be okay. And it doesn't necessarily leave a lot of space or time or energy for asking the bigger questions. But the more we can even just ask the question, take like that journal. I'd love to, but tell me about your journaling practice and how what that's opened up for you.
Yeah. So again, I owe a lot to this book, right? It's kind of like The Big Leap, where there's so many sub elements in the book that, again, I don't even realize. I don't know if they meant to pack it all in there, but it really stirred things up in me, right? Like, yeah, in The Big Leap, like you said, upper limits, your zone of genius, his perspective on integrity, on commitment, relationships. There's so much for me that was in that book. And same with this essentialism, like his perspective on fun and play, and how essential that is actually for us if we just look at sort of our own being as a big picture, and that play and that fun, and how much that stirs up creativity, like you were saying before, like making it essential, like, and scientifically why it is, was also super helpful, because sometimes we can put that down. We're like, oh, I got to do all these important things. I'm not allowed to have fun, right? And that book
Mm-hmm.
also was super helpful to allow myself and have, some good backing for myself in terms of like, yeah, no, we need to have fun. Like, I have this motorbike that someone generously gave me to use last summer, and I know initially I struggle with like, this doesn't, and this is before I read the book, but this doesn't feel essential. Like, I can't really take my kids on it, can't really take much stuff on it. Like, it doesn't really have a lot of utility as some of our other vehicles would. But then, really, after reading this book, I'm like, no, but I love it. Like, it's so much fun to go on it, and I can, like, there's some social outings that we do on it, and I'll take the kids on short trips, and my youngest loves when I take her to school and drop her off, even though the school's like 30 seconds away. Um, but yeah, the book was super helpful with creating new meanings for things, right? Given that we're meaning making machines. And
Mm-hmm.
so play was one thing that it helped me get a new perspective around, and creating that and having that be essential in my life. And then back to your question around journaling, sorry.
It's
So
okay.
with journaling, his perspectives on it was around, like, again, my takeaway on it would what is like being the journalist of our own lives. And I think there's a part to like just getting our thoughts out of our head and seeing them on paper. I think that's sort of a classic view of journaling and writing it down. For me, even though I'm very digital, I like the practice of physically writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
There's something really helpful about that, and I'm thinking it, I'm writing it, I'm touching the pen into the paper, and so I really liked his perspective on becoming the journalist of your own life. I used an Atomic Habit, again, one of my other favorite books, around not trying to make it a big practice to start. So I just set a goal of just more than one sentence. Like, if I just making it a practice of, I got a nice book, I got a nice pen, so something that felt really good. I had it with me all the time, and I set a reminder in my phone, and I had an app to track it. Like, I did all the things to make sure I was set up for success, and then I made it easy. Just Ryan, write more than one, just one sentence, greater than one sentence every day. That's it. And he said after you do that for quite a while, what you can do is go back through it and just kind of glaze over all your days and start to notice like the themes, like the story. Like, you're being a journalist and you're trying to pick up the way that your life's going and what's being important and how is it shaping, and is it going the way you want, So I don't know. There was a whole section in his book around journaling that again was super helpful, and for the first time I've been able to and I've waffled with journaling over the years, from lots of books and courses, but this time I've been able to do it the most consistently, and enjoy it the most, and look forward to it the most out of any time in my life. So yeah, really really appreciate what he shared in the book about this.
That's cool. Something you touch on, I'd love to ask you about. So often I feel this idea of what's essential, and when you get down to the things that you really want, they sometimes feel like they're just luxuries. Like, they're not out of, and so often as dads, we think about necessity a lot. We think about, okay, I want to give my kids everything, but not give them everything so that they feel entitled and they don't learn things for themselves and things like that. And so when we think about ourselves, sometimes I'll speak for myself, I will put myself last. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the dinner table or come home late from dinner for dinner, and I won't make myself my own plate of food. I'll just know that the kids wouldn't have eaten everything, so I'll just eat their leftovers, and that's okay, because I feel like, well, I don't want to waste food. Or so all of a sudden this idea of the thing that I actually want just actually is more of a luxury. And maybe there's an idea of like, well, what would others think? Or I'm just, I'm being self-important, or, like how do you feel that plays?
Yeah, I think I totally know what you're talking about, and I think that's probably a big topic for a lot of us as dads, and moms too, I'm sure, right? Where it's how do you know, because there's so many things that we could be doing and that we might, we should be doing that we might put on ourselves, right? If we, we have our own businesses, so you could be, I need to be doing more for the business, and I'm not. There's always, I mean, because there's always more that we could be doing, in theory, right? There's always more we could be doing for our kids, our wives, our businesses, our health, our friends, our family. There's so many ways that we should things. And what I hear you're saying there is like, how do we discern? How do we figure out, where to put our time, where to put our energy, where to put our resources? How do we figure out that? In my opinion, that's what this book has also been really helpful with is, and even before this too, with a lot of the work that we've been doing. But just like where do we put our time and energy, and how do we feel about that in terms of, is this really essential? Is the motorbike a luxury? Or is it essential? And so I do think that's different for everybody. And I do think in that there's definitely is a discernment, and everyone has to, I think, figure this out for themselves in terms of like, is this essential in terms of, fueling me and allowing me to show up as the best me? Because if I'm showing up as the best me, that gives me the best ability to serve myself, serve my family, serve others. Versus, is this taking away from me? Is it taking away from others? Like if this was like $1 million bike and I was channeling all this time on it and putting all this money into it, and that was actually taking away from this whole ecosystem, of the family, that wouldn't be good. That to me wouldn't fall into this essentialism bucket. But here I have a bike that a friend generously gave to me. It costs very little to insure and run it. And then I get a ton of enjoyment out of myself, as do some of my kids. To me, and that allows me to show up in an even better way for them and gives them an example of, man, dad's looking like he's having a lot of fun. Like dad's doing some stuff that, you know, isn't just the, feed me, take me to school. He's finding ways to really enjoy his life. I think, again, in there is some discernment to make sure that, again, it's fueling me, it's fueling the family, it's fueling others, from that inside out perspective that we've talked about before. And I want to be able to show up as an example for them in terms of like, I'm not going to just martyr my life, and make it all about the family or make it all about work, because I don't think that's what the example is that I want to set for them. So I do think, thanks to this book and some other ones, it's finding that, balance is a tricky word, but finding a way to, balance these different parts of our lives, our own health, our own business, our relationships with kids, the things that we want to express in the world, finding a balance that would be considered essential to ourselves, that's actually fueling us and fueling others is, again, I mean, I'm still figuring that out. That's why this work is the work that can continue every single day and compound. And I do think that, this process has been really helpful in order to discern what I consider as essential, and that allows, again, I think one of the key things is there is the key component of filling our own cup first, but not having it, not continuing to only do that, because then, as you're saying, that could be self-centered, that could be selfish. But there is a sweet spot in there where I think it's super important to do that in a way that allows us to then fuel others, right? Where if I can get my cup overflowing, then I'm in this place of just like abundant service where I'm good. Now I'm ready just to show up for others. And I think on this path, you can get to that point. Like after this call, I'll be in that place, right? Like you and I will have this amazing conversation. I'll have done my morning routines. I'll have prayed. I'll have journaled. I'll have done my push-ups. I've had some coffee. I'll be ready to show up when the kids get up. I'm like, boom, let's go. Like my cup's super full. So I think, the analogy I know that some people have is put your own oxygen mask on first, because if you're on the airplane and other people need your help, if you haven't and you're running out of air, you're not going to be in a very good place to serve them. So there's a discernment and a balance around how much oxygen do I need so that I'm in a really good place to then be able to help others with theirs. I guess that's in kind of a way I look at it.
Yeah, I remember when my first daughter was born. She's 8 now, but when she was first born, I remember making the conscious decision that from this moment on, everything revolves around my wife and my daughter. I want to make sure that they are comfortable at all times, that they are taken care of at all times. And in that, I believe, very giving and very loving intent, what that ended up what ended up happening in practice was that I always put myself last, in that their needs always came first and my needs sometimes never came. So, but what ended up happening, now my daughter is 6 months old and I'm a wreck. I'm exhausted. I've gained, in 6 months, I probably gained 15 pounds. So I'm not attracted to my wife anymore. I'm not showing up. I'm grumpy all the time. I'm exhausted. And I remember my wife just being angry and be like, listen, like, you got to take care of yourself. And it took that for me to like, oh yeah, like this is actually important, like taking care of myself. And even taking it a step further, like we talk about essentialism, I believe some of those luxuries, what we consider as luxuries, are actually so important, because not only do we want to just do the things to show up for others, but yet when we are filling our own selves, not just with the tasks of the journaling and the meditation and things that we sometimes feel like, okay, well, I've got to do this just to be level and just to be able to show up and be able to be prepared. But also part of that is filling our hearts. And I think 3 questions that came up for me, and I've heard this before, is when you think about any practice or any action or anything that you want to incorporate into my life, I would ask a question like, does it feel good to me? Yes or no? Is it good for me? Yes or no? Is it good for others? So eating a bunch of Honey Nut Cheerios, my daughter and I were talking about this last night. I love cereal. I could eat cereal morning, noon, and night. Yet, I have not eaten a bowl of cereal in probably 6 years, because I know that afterwards I feel like a bag of shit. And I just want to curl up in a corner and take a nap for 6 hours. So it feels really good, but it's not good for me. And it's not good for others. So it only ticks one box of 3. So I think the more boxes it ticks, so riding your bike feels great. It's good for you because it fills your soul, and it's good for others because it gives it there's so much versatility in that it gives them the opportunity to have adventure. It gives them the opportunity to see their dad doing things that it's important to do things that you love. He's doing it. It must be important for me too. And that when he shows back up, yeah, he's way more present. He's excited because he's filled himself up. He's overflowing. So that ticks all 3 boxes. So yeah, keep doing it.
I like those questions. That's good. I like to simplify that whole perspective around being able to ask those questions, because you're right. Those would be the ones that I think I'm asking myself, right, in terms of just the bigger ecology of it. Like, my lens is win-wins. And so, each one of those is making sure that there's a win, right? In terms of how you might look at something. Because, yeah, I don't want to create a win-lose-lose where it's like good for me, but not good for anybody else, right? That's when I think the energy could be too self-serving. It's like, if it's not serving those others, if it's not ticking off all those boxes, then maybe it's not essential. So I think so I think the work, and there's 2 other questions here. We're already at our time and we only talked about the first one, but just to give the full framework of the very first chapter, the book's divided into 3 from what I recall. One is sort of this discovery of what is essential, and then the other 2 chapters is around like how to make sure that you keep on that path and you don't let clutter come into your life and distractions and all those things. Like, how do you put that really into practice? But the very first section was the one that really helped provide clarity that came into this year. And so the three questions, at least in terms of how I remember, the one was, oh, and this is a really fun use of Chat GPT. I think I sent it to you, was I could scan my notes, my handwritten notes that are like super messy, and then ask GPT to type it out. And it actually understood all my chicken scratch printing in my journal, which was amazing.
That was
Um,
amazing.
so like it was like 98% accurate. I was like, that's how does it, how does it understand my crappy writing? But anyway, side note. So the first question was, yeah, what really excites me? What am I really passionate about, or would be, maybe I haven't been in the past, but like what really juices me up? And I think in that is really a connection to our values. And so if you haven't done that work, I think that's also super important. It would be connected to this, is like, what do I value in my life? And having that, I mean, there's a whole date with destiny with Tony Robbins, is like, there's like a whole day on your value system, and realizing when you actually put it down on paper that, oh man, I'm putting whatever, something way high up on my value system here that actually isn't serving me, and it isn't really what I want in my life. And so there's a whole practice of shifting those values around to make sure that what is really important to you is at the top of the list and that you are making time for. So I think that's a big subcomponent of this work, is figuring out what do we actually really value and making sure that that's at the top of the list. And I think that's what would be considered essential. The second part of that is, what am I uniquely, positioned to offer? You might, from the big leap, the language is around like zone of genius. Like, what am I really good at that I could do all day? It doesn't feel like work. It almost feels too easy to be paid for. And
Hmm.
because a lot of times I'll find this when talking to other people, it's like, oh, you don't know how to do that? I'm like, no. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, that's your zone of genius. Like, it's so easy for you, but like it can be so difficult for other people because you've developed a lot of times like mastery around it without even realizing that that's an incredible skill set that you have. So what am I excited about? What am I uniquely positioned to offer? My zone of genius that, again, is unique about me, a collection of all my expertise, all my experiences that I'm, again, uniquely positioned to offer. And then the third thing is, what's an important problem that people need solved out in the world? So that, again, it provides an external perspective of, and if you were to kind of, I journaled a lot, like pages, answering each of these questions. And then I started to sort of group them. And you kind of get this intersection of, what am I excited about? And there's all these things. What am I uniquely positioned to offer? And then what's an important problem that I think needs solving in the world, that a lot of people would need solving? That's kind of the business end of it, is like, okay, if this is an important problem that a lot of people need help with or help solving that. And so in the intersection of all those three things is
Hmm.
where I decided to really focus coming into this year. Things that juice me up, that I'm really uniquely positioned to offer value around, and that other people need sort of help with. That, to me, where there was two or three things that I wrote down, well, three things that I wrote down January, that to this day are the things that I'm focused on and making essential in my life. So I just think it's been such an incredible practice because, I remember I sat down maybe a month ago with Kate, our good friend, Suki's
Hmm.
wife, and I showed her, and I was like, look what I wrote down back in January. And I hadn't gone back and looked at that in a while. And it was just amazing for me to reflect and show her, like, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. And I've made that important to myself, and I've made it a daily commitment and a daily practice to honor what I told myself, giving myself all that time and space, which was super important. I came out of these things with things that I deemed to be essential in my life. And look, I'm making it a commitment and practice every day to uphold that.
That's amazing. Well played.
So yeah, I think just the beginning of that, as you were saying, and in that interview with Tim Ferriss, is around how do you create that time and space? Like you're saying, like we can get so into all these other things, especially as dads, right? If we're with business and our health and the kids and their activities and life, it starts with giving that even just a small window of time and space to ourselves, like just going for a hike somewhere, like a walk somewhere quiet, somewhere we can be with our thoughts, Again, they talked about some practical ways to do that in the book. I went to the library. I went for some walks out in the woods. Like it didn't need to be a big deal. I did it over a series of days. Yeah, I just think that, you know, we talk about Tony a lot. When would now be a good time? Like when do we really want to start, creating more days that could be the best days of our lives? Like when do we want to start doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, think about when someone thinks about something that they want, and then they're confronted with the idea, like, yeah, but it'll take 5 years. It won't. I couldn't do that for 5 more years. And then again, I remember Tony saying, okay, but in 5 years from now, if you don't do it, you'll still be 5 years older. That 5 years is going to pass regardless. So you might as well choose something that actually gets you what you want. Or said it another way, how much how much more time are you willing to let go by when you're not doing what you want? How much more time are you willing to waste not going after the life that you want? How much more time are you willing to let go by where you're not being the best parent that you can be? What is the cost? What is the opportunity cost that you're missing out on by not doing it? How much is it costing you to not do it?
Yeah, if you can find, you're right. There's some motivators there that could help create the juice, and you can use pain as a good motivator too. Like you're saying, like like if you really tune into the cost, like of doing this, how is it costing? Yeah, what's the cost to your health? What's the cost in terms of like the example that you're setting as the years go by, in front of your kids, and they're seeing you not lit up about life and what you're doing, right? What's that cost going to lead to in terms of them? And now, and when they go out into their own life and be like, oh no, I saw my dad. He suffered through things, and that's just the way things are done. There's ways to make sure that you can really tune into the impact of our own lives, I think. And pain can be a good motivator if you really tune into like, ooh, what's the worst that could happen out of this? I think some people live too often there, but I think that's important because Tony used pain as a really good motivator, as an away from motivation. Like, okay, I really don't want that now that I've given myself time and space to think about it. So then you can use that as a motivator to fuel you. And then I think it's super important to focus a lot on, well, what do I really want? And that's a pull. So you can use push and pull as motivators. And I think it's important to do both because they'll both get us moving if we're stuck. And so I think it's good to get the polarity there and then supercharge that pull. Like, what do I really want? And give that a ton of juice. How do I really want to show up? How do I really want to be every day? And then getting some help with that, right? This book was super helpful with that. I mean, I had a ton of conversations around, in the beginning of this year with people, close to me, mentors and whatnot, to get perspective on things. Our men's groups for me have been super helpful because every week I'm going to bring to them my thought process just to make sure that like I'm getting, again, perspective. I'm getting help from them on like, yeah, okay, we can see that's really important, and I can share with them my wins. I can share with them the pain. So getting support, creating daily practices, it can be super helpful. There is a whole other, it's funny, we can talk about this in a different show. There is a whole psychology around not necessarily sharing some of our big goals as well with everybody. I used to do that where, oh yeah, no, this is what I want. This is my goal. This is my dream, But actually, there is some science and psychology around not like being very selective about who you share that with, because even just in the art of sharing it or in the aspect of sharing it, you start to tell yourself that it's happening or it's happened. So then your body starts to lose the same juice, but by keeping it sacred, and because then also what happens is some people will, talk you out of it or doubt you, or you'll start to bring in all other people's stuff. And so anyways, there's just a whole other conversation around keeping some of your big goals private and being selective about who you share them with. But yeah, it's important work. I do consider this to be essential for us as dads, and I really appreciate Greg for writing this book, and I really appreciate these guys and the podcast that I've gotten to listen to, where guys talk about the stuff. Maybe someday someone will listen to us, and it'll help them have some perspective on these things and potentially, lead to some amazing things in their own life. And I don't think you need to throw, I guess this was one other point I wanted to just quickly share. I know we're over time. Is I think it's not also about, sometimes it's not about like just throwing, as they say, the baby with the
With the
bathwater.
bathwater.
Like sometimes, yeah, I know it's a funny expression, but I think there also can be ways to be like, okay, this is super important in my life. Now I realize for me, maybe I don't have to throw like I remember this from one of these. I went to like a silent meditation retreat with Doctor or David Beckwith. And all right,
Michael
Beckwith, yeah,
Beckwith?
Michael Beckwith. Thank you. I know it didn't sound right coming out. Michael Beckwith, yeah, love him.
Yeah.
Went to a silent meditation retreat with him, and after having this big epiphany after this 5 days in the desert, and same things with some of these events, same thing with these books. He's like, okay, don't all of a sudden go back and become the like monk on the mountaintop. Don't go and just like change your whole life, I think is what he was trying to say with this new learning and this new epiphany. He's like, if you're a fisherman, go back to being a fisherman, but now go back as this whole, revitalized you and this new awakened you and show people what that's like as the fisherman, because that's potentially we're going to have the biggest impact, not going off, on your own in some mountaintop. So I think there's also a way where sometimes we can create and co-create kind of what we really want that's important through the life that we already have. I
Hmm.
know like as a small example with our games that I used to make, we fed hungry kids. So people would buy things in our game and they'd watch ads. And just by playing our games, we were able to feed kids here in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, where we live. We were able to feed kids that didn't have enough food. So I think, that I felt was essential for me. That was aligned with my values of being able to contribute to people's lives and gives back. We were able to do that through making games. We put a gratitude practice in the game, even though totally didn't fit with the game. But every day, people could come in and play our game and earn free stuff in our game just by taking 5 seconds to watch a little timer. And we had a little question, what are you grateful for today? So I think there are
Hmm.
ways to sometimes co-create with where we're at, the things that we truly find that's important. And sometimes that's, for me, that just wasn't, it ended up being not enough. I really wanted to make, a bigger impact with the things that I felt like was important. I think it was hard for me to kind of squeeze that through the screen. So
Hmm.
I did make some bigger changes this year. But yeah, anyways, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Well done, man. Well, onward and upward.
The journey, right? It's a process, it's an evolution, it's a growth. I don't think it ever stops.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for the conversation today.
Yeah.
And yeah, lots of big questions. And hopefully everybody takes these questions and makes it maybe the best day of your life.
Right? And make it essential. One last thing that I did make it my again, it's all what we make it mean, right? Like I could have just heard the word in my head and totally ignored it. I could have heard the word, sped through the book, never did anything about it. But we make up meaning, and I made it mean something really important to me that at this phase, right? I made essentialism my word for this year, right? Do you do that? We have
Mm.
this practice of picking one word for the year.
I've not been consistent with it, but I've done it in the past. I don't know that I did one this year.
We did, yeah, with our group of guys. We picked the word for maybe 6 years now. And so yeah, I made it that important that this year my word of the year is essentialism, and it's just been, an inspection and a process and a way of living just to make sure, like, I guess we didn't totally talk about this with our kids, but at least starts with us and starts with our own process and our own journey. So I just chose to make it really important in terms of like, well, what's essential? How do I want to show up? And what's essential for me to put my time and my energy and my resources into.
Hmm.
And I can say, yeah, I'm a big fan of the work. Really big fan of this book. I appreciate you asking some questions about it. I really love that you're diving into it. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, man.
You might have a different experience with it, and but super happy to jam on it anytime.
Cool. All right, man. Well, have an awesome day, and
Yeah, you
everyone
too.
listening, have an awesome day, everybody. Let's make it
Appreciate
count.
you guys checking us out. Yeah. All right, bro.
All right.
Awesome one.